Well, hello and welcome back to our Ontario network of CAPC, CPNP projects. I'm really delighted that here we are at our pre-conference sharing and learning circles, and really thrilled to introduce and welcome Arlene Hache, who's going to spend some time talking with us today. And oh goodness, I have oh, here we go. The title of your session, Arlene, 3 decades of grassroots empowerment. And so really welcome, Arlene. It's really great to have you here, and looking forward to hearing what you have to share with us.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you could just move the first slide over.
Sure. How's that?
Great.
Okay.
So first of all, I really appreciate being invited to speak to everyone. And I'm hoping that there are people from the Public Health Agency of Canada in the meeting as well. You know, because at the end of the day, the purpose of the presentation that I'm giving today is really to give that 3-decade look at the impact that funding for CPNP and CAPC had in communities across Canada. And so this small but really consistent investment had massive impacts across the country that I think aren't captured in how the program is being evaluated, partly because, you know, they sort of hone in on their purpose, their limited and singular purpose, which is to support the health of newborn babies and moms who are breastfeeding, and that's been the purpose. And of course, they've evaluated the effectiveness of meeting those goals, but I'm really here to talk about the unintended outcomes that nobody anticipated at the time when the CAPC CPNP program was instituted. And so this really is to give credit to the Public Health Agency of Canada over 3 decades, and really to the consistency of this program for creating systemic change and societal change. So you could just we'll move to the next slide. So really, my experience comes from, first of all, I have lived experience being a homeless person. That's how I ended up in Yellowknife in the Northwest Territories. And that's where I live, and that's where I've lived for half a century. And, you know, as a homeless person, I couldn't really function in
I see Arlene is frozen.
kind of existing or homeless. And so we established in the families.
I see she's frozen again. Hopefully.
Oh, you tell me when can you hear me now?
Hi, Arlene. We did lose you for a moment there.
Okay.
I think you're back.
It is my my internet on my end that's unstable. So
Right.
I'll
It
try to,
happens.
yeah.
Yeah.
So what I was saying was, I don't know how far, I don't know when you lost me, but what I was saying is my work in the community began half a century ago, you know, when I was in my 20s. And I was a homeless person who ended up in Yellowknife, originally from outside of Smith Falls, or outside of Ottawa in Smith Falls. And I and the friends I hung out with basically on the street couldn't really function in very rigid kind of colonial type of organizations. And so we established our own organization with people of lived experience of homelessness and trauma and sort of recovery and all that kind of stuff. And so I ran the Yellowknife Women's Society and the Center for Northern Families for 30 years. Then I retired and I went to work with the Temiskaming Native Women's Support Group and Keepers of the Circle in Northern Ontario for another decade. And now I've retired. So the reason I'm here, I'm confident, is because of that long memory that is so important to really understand the impact of, the work that we're all doing in the communities. So what I'm bringing to you today is really sort of a trajectory of these two organizations and where the CAPC and CPNP funding fit into the development of those organizations. And I'll ask you to move to the next slide.
Sure.
So one is an Indigenous hub, as you saw, located in Northern Ontario around Kirkland Lake and Temiskaming. And the other is located in Yellowknife in the Northwest Territories. And probably the thing to know is that both of these organizations were founded and established by my sister and myself. She was in Northern Ontario and I was in Yellowknife. And we exchanged proposals, we exchanged ideas, we created similar programs. It was just like a pooling of knowledge and resources and experience to create these two organizations. One was Indigenous run, and one was run by women with lived experience of homelessness and trauma and that sort of thing. So we shared a very, very similar mandate and mission, not to assume or to suggest that the experience of non-Indigenous women who are homeless is the same as Indigenous women. They are not the same, they're similar. And then the pathway out of trauma is kind of the thing that bonded us together. And so both my sister and I have worked with Indigenous communities since 1970. And that's where our work has landed us. And so it was intergenerational trauma that kind of brought us into community, and we were embraced by elders and Indigenous women who really kind of actually took care of us in those early days of trauma and craziness, really. Anyway, the mandate for both of these organizations was to support the political, social, and economic equality of women, but in our case, Indigenous women. Because in Northern Ontario, the organization was governed by Indigenous women. In Yellowknife, it was governed by women that were diverse. But as you can imagine, because it focused on homelessness and it focused on marginalization and the recovery from trauma, 99% of the people who accessed those services were Indigenous, Dene, Métis, and Inuit women that I worked with. And our mission jointly was to remove barriers to self-determination and self-sufficiency, and to position women as recognized leaders in the community, and to equip women and their families with information and skills they need to overcome challenges and to take their rightful place, their position in the community. And then to develop and deliver culturally based programs and services across the life cycle. And so that's kind of where both of these organizations kind of influenced and worked together and developed our approaches to serving the community. Now we'll move to the next slide. Now, I've been saying it repeatedly over years, but only to some people. And what I really am hoping to convey to the Public Health Agency of Canada is this CAPC CPNP funding that was introduced in 1990 seed funded these two organizations. We had no funding. We were marginalized. We were advocates. We fought against the status quo. We worked really, really hard to make sure the voices of Indigenous women in particular came to the forefront, and it was very difficult. And we volunteered, like I volunteered for the first 4 years because the government refused box. They would fund essentially, and they kind of still do that. So it's a long, and Keepers of the Circle and the Arlene Women's Society under the Center for Northern Family, we became renowned, across the North. The key point is funding. And the one stable funding they had from 1990 to 2022 is CAPC and CPNP funding.
Mhm.
And it seeded these fledgling grassroots women's groups across the country. And Keepers of the Circle and the Center for Northern Families took off, and I'll just show you where we ended up with that seed funding. So although the funding was for a project, a very specific project, it actually changed the world, really, in terms of the voice of women coming to the forefront. So Keepers of the Circle got $58,000 in 1997 to run the CAPC program, and that's what they still have today, almost. I think they got a slight boost, but that was it. The Yellowknife Women's Society got $50,000 annual funding, and it stayed that way for 30 years. So it wasn't a lot of funding, but it was important funding, and it paid for a person to work with marginalized women, really, who had been silenced through colonization and through marginalization and through, life experience that tried to devalue who they were. And so I'm hoping that through this presentation, I can really persuade PHAC that they had a certain goal in mind, but really they were the early signatures really on to valuing the voice of lived experience and valuing the role of culture and the role of community responses to women's health needs. Anyway, the slide probably doesn't do it, but at the end of the day, this seed funding funded all these women's groups across the country, including across the North, which was really rare because all these communities across the North were rarely even acknowledged, let alone funded. And it was also, the first in my experience to reach out specifically to Indigenous women and to other marginalized women and to remote communities. They were very specific in their intent. And it was the first funding that I had seen that really was intended for those women.
Mm.
And it was relatively small, but so consistent, you can rely on it every year. And I just am trying to, again, convey today, people will think that $50,000 is nothing. That's not going to keep any organization running, blah, blah, blah. But it was the valuing of women, lived experience, and community-based responses to recovery from trauma that really was instituted by CAPC and CPNP. And now it's, in my view, it's a big trend. Everybody wants to be on board with community-based organizations and, community-based responses, person-centered responses. Like, it's become such a, what do you call that? It's become such a cliche in some ways and such a trend. CAPC and CPNP under PHAC was the very first focused effort around bringing those voices to the table.
Right.
And you'll be able to see the outcome of that. So we'll just change the slide.
Sure.
Now, if you have any questions, like hop on, but I'll be able to answer them as we go. So here's the programming. Now that you're all in CAPC CPNP projects, so I don't have to tell you kind of what the activities were, but here's some of them. You know, healthy foods, labor and delivery. Like this is the focus on, you know, supporting healthy children, the birth of healthy children and breastfeeding children. This is kind of the programming focus. So I'll leave that slide up there for a little bit. And it was different in every community. And it actually was the flexibility of the CPNP and CAPC program that allowed, and it kind of grew, you know, from kind of a narrow interpretation of what it meant to support women who were pregnant and breastfeeding. It kind of grew to expand into areas of supporting men as well, and into areas of supporting the recovery of trauma, addressing family violence, and just taking the whole person and the whole family into consideration, especially with the CAPC program, or the CAPC program. Neither the Center for Northern Families nor the Keepers of the Circle had CAPC funding. It was purely CPNP funding. So it was a little frustrating to, what do you call that? To think that support for women would end at a certain point, when we know in our communities that support must be sustained over many, many years to address issues of intergenerational trauma and marginalization that continues today. But I mean, we solve that by other things and accessing other resources and that kind of thing. But it was the marriage of CPNP and CAPC that allowed communities to take the whole. And of course, I've got tons of stories about you know, in terms of the difference between professionals that are credentialed and getting.
Oh, Arlene? When she comes back, I will ask her to repeat something.
They're learning out of books instead of in the community.
Hi,
I'll
Arlene.
stay on.
Hi.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can. We had a couple blips, but I wonder, you were, for me, when you cut out, I was wondering if you might be able to repeat, because I was sitting on the edge of my seat, because you said it was the marriage of CAPC and CPNP that allowed, and then you blipped out. So can you remember what you said there?
Yes, the marriage of CAPC and CPNP allowed community groups, or it allowed us to take into consideration the whole family. And like I was saying, neither organization was funded through CAPC. So we were able to get that addressed somewhere else. But at the end of the day, we were super jealous and envious of organizations that had both funding, because communities, Indigenous communities in particular, never separate children from parents, from elders. It's all about the whole community. You never leave anyone behind, including men. So, you know, that narrow kind of prescriptive CPNP program was frustrating. And we just met that need in a different way.
Right.
However, for the agencies that accessed both, it was a fulsome, broad continuum of services that supported the entire family. And that was so critical in working with, you know, Indigenous communities. And then I was saying that, you know, if you're really interested in kind of knowing the ins and outs of challenges and that sort of thing, we found it very challenging when we hired professionals versus people with lived experience. And of course, you know, as agencies you know, serving women and working with women who were marginalized, like homeless women and Indigenous women, we were always under pressure to make sure we hired credentialed people, you
Right.
know, that were social workers and that had all of these degrees and all of that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, at least in the early years, they did not understand community. And it became a really challenging environment to kind of raise the voice of women. And, you know, I remember a specific, well, if we have time, I'll get into that specific couple of incidents where, you know, people with credentials really jeopardized our ability to serve the community in a way that they understood and in a way that met their needs. And so, you know, it really still exists where, you know, efforts of decolonization is kind of the key job that we have now moving forward to make sure that Indigenous women lead their own work and, you know, do that work through their own lens. And so advocacy was a massive part of the work that happened, and advocacy was sort of put as an add-on to nutritional food, for example. But advocacy and the trust of women and knowing that, you know, you had their back was the number one thing that brought them to the programs. And, you know, there's a specific incident that if I have time, I'll talk to you about that really conveyed the difference between delivering a program and caring for a person. And, you know, today, you know, the idea of being person-centered is the trendy thing to do, but it's a difficult thing to do. And health service providers kind of often say, you know, we're very person-centered, but actually they aren't, and they have no idea how to do that, because you have to have lived experience, in from my perspective, to be able to understand what that means and to make space for the voice of people with lived experience. Anyway, let's go to the next slide. So, of course, there's many more anticipated outcomes from the prenatal program and the CAPC program. So I didn't spend a lot of time on this because you guys have all read it. You all know about it. You know what the anticipated outcomes are. You know what the measurements are and all these sort of things. So I've looked at the anticipated outcomes a little bit, and here they are. And there's lists and lists of anticipated outcomes that were met. They were met, and you know, the CAPC and CPNP program need to be credited for meeting, you know, these measures and specific measures. And so I'll just ask you to move to the next slide. Now, here's the things that I think people don't know and don't realize, and PHAC does not know and does not realize, again, because they need to step back. They need to step back and really take a look at, you know, the total impact of that seed funding in 1990 that has not changed, you know, to 2022. And the change, the unanticipated outcomes were related to systemic and societal change. And they were the first programs that I'm aware of that really supported Indigenous marginalized women. And it was consistent over 3 decades. And it created a paradigm shift in valuing lived expertise, in hiring Indigenous women from the program as staff, and delivering community-based health services designed by the community for the community. You know, CAPC and CPNP began a trend that is so popular now, but they're never credits that was the
We are losing you a little bit, Arlene.
the the impact kind of, but they actually didn't realize that when they're talking about the impact of their I'm here.
Well, oh, I
I'm
think
here.
I think we're syncing up again.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think where I heard you were talking about how, you know, how CAPC and CPNP really, with the seed funding, really started a trend. It was really groundbreaking in a way, but and that's really not sort of credited for being, you know, those first steps into that, you know, person-centered, honoring the lived experience. Focus and programming, if that's, I heard you correctly.
That's right. And it's so, you know, again, you know, other people talk about corporate knowledge. There is no organizational historical knowledge. And so, you know, today, you know, if you look at the federal government today, for example, they have legislated lived expertise as being valued in the areas of homelessness, for example. And they think that's really innovative, but really it isn't, because CAPC and CPNP started that process in 1990, long before, you know, it became the trend. And so now it's the trend, and I'm happy for that. But again, if you don't have that historical kind of picture, I find that, what do you call that? PHAC has not taken their place in that paradigm shift. And I think it's important they do, particularly when they're looking at kind of a renewal or a different vision or a different idea of CAPC, CPNP, that they look at like the broader impact of that role and that investment, so that when they move forward, they can have a better grounding of what made them unique, cutting edge, groundbreaking, and all of those things. And then finally, the other thing, and you all will be able to look at a lot more unanticipated outcomes than I can, but really, it was the first time that there were really safe spaces for hard conversations. And, you know, I remember in 1990, 1995, around there, all of the discussions really were controlled by white feminists. May I say that? When it came to the development and delivery of services for, you know, Indigenous women who they treated like charity cases, from my perspective. And they still do that from my perspective. And my perspective counts, you know, because I've been doing it for half a century, and then I watch the history and I look at it today. And, you know, I always go back to what Cindy Blackstock said. And Cindy Blackstock talks about settlers, I am one of them, being a witness. I am here as a witness to really convey that, you know, the murder and missing Indigenous women's finding of genocide is real. It happened, it's real. I saw it in the North over half a century. I see it continuing today. So again, this role that CAPC and CPNP played in giving voice to Indigenous women, in giving them space to really come to grips with their own perspectives of what life was about and like, and all those sorts of things, really created that paradigm shift where, you know, half a century later, the excitement for me is looking at young Indigenous women leaders who are unstoppable. And, you know, I go back to Jessica Simpson. If anyone knows Jessica Simpson, she's an Indigenous author who really talks about Indigenous feminism. What does that mean? And she doesn't want that defined by settler women and non-Indigenous women. Anyway, again, I don't know if I'm conveying it properly, and I hope this reaches the high levels. This paradigm shift was initiated through the CAPC and CPNP program. And so let's move to the next slide.
Okay. Oh, 1 second. There you go.
So now I'm just going to go quickly into just a little bit of the trajectory. You know, at the end of the day, this CAPC and CPN funding was around in the mid-90s, really. So Keepers of the Circle was just a dinky little organization run by Indigenous women with no money. It was super tough and very difficult to persuade anybody to really be of support at all. And the one thing they did get was a college residence in Kirkland Lake was gifted to them. They had no funding, one staff, and that was about it. And then this building that they had to keep going. And they had they rented a 2-room office in New Liskeard. So this organization was fledgling, an Indigenous women-run organization that got CAPC funding. No, not CAPC, CPNP. And again, that hasn't changed in 30 years. But it was the consistency of the funding, the reliability of the funding, that you could build capacity based on that consistency. And then it just went from there. And so it started as a college residence.
Lost you again, Arlene.
Residents, a 2-room office gifted with an elementary school. Then they were renovations in each site. Then more recently, oh, you let me know when I'm back.
Okay. I think you're frozen again.
You let me know when I'm back.
I think we're getting there.
I hope so.
I think, yeah, we just, every once in a while, we just have to pause and reconnect, right?
Okay.
And align our signals up. But you were saying how it started as this residence.
Yeah, and it was, again, hard to know if I can convey it. I tried to look for old pictures, but I couldn't find any of the very old pictures from the 90s, partially because I'm retired and I'm a little disconnected from at least the Yellowknife Women's Society. But again, this is, it was run by volunteers, one staff person, very difficult. And, I'll just tell you this story about more recently, we were talking to a guy from Timmins, asking him to come and visit because we're doing pre-employment programs. And so we asked him to visit our site so that we could introduce him to kind of our facility, and on that goes. And he said, I took my son to that residence, 20 years ago. And I wouldn't leave him there. It was such a dump. And so, of course, I got really mad and I said, 20 years ago, it was a dump because that's all society thought Indigenous women should have. But now it's like a vogue kind of place because we got $1.5 million to renovate both sites, the one in Kirkland Lake and the one in New Liskeard. So they are top of the line facilities now. And then more recently, we were given 18-acre property with an old jail where we're going to develop a housing project. And then we also now have a land lease of 10 acres where we're developing a cultural site. And so we're really, you'll see in the slides to come, we went from almost nothing in terms of funding, support, facilities, when we got the CPNP funding. And again, that funding allowed us to leverage and build our capacity to access other funding and to do other things. And so today, Keepers of the Circle delivers programs across the country and to deliver all kinds of different services across Ontario. And they are recognized as an organization of excellence in the delivery of pre-employment training and all kinds of things. It began with that CPNP funding. It began with that. And that's what we have today. We'll just go to the next slide. And so here's some of the things. Right now, we reach 35 communities. We have a health service that reaches over 1,000 people. And you see the children, 174 children through daycare. Now we have 120 employees, I believe. We have trained well over 630 Indigenous women in pre-employment training, in mining, trades, all kinds of different stuff. And 76% of those women secured employment, and we have over 51 partners. So when you look at this today, it's a top employer for our region. The Keepers of the Circle is a top employer, an influencer, a voice for Indigenous women in Northern Ontario, and nobody remembers that began with that CPNP funding. So that's my message today. Hopefully to PHAC. That investment was critical in creating avenues of voice for Indigenous women. So we'll go to the next slide. Here's the departments we have now in 2021. These are the departments we have. And we've expanded beyond belief. And again, it's a very strong infrastructure we have as well, you know, in terms of human resources, finances, all that stuff. We'll go to the next slide. I don't want to belabor this too much, but it's really to look at the growth. So when you look at like the one department, it's on leadership and culture, but here's all the elements of this leadership, leadership and culture. So each of these are actually programs that are funded and, you know, they have their own kind of staffing group, and which goes into that it's well over 100 staff we have. And so we'll go, we are governed by an elders council. You know, we do work across the country. We have a youth council. So let's go to the next slide. This is the education and training. And, you know, our golden motto is Indigenous women should run the world. So if you look at the education and training, we're really looking at, you know, community training. We have a program called Culture, Confidence, and Competence. That's the pre-employment training program. We do industry placements with mining, welding, all kinds of trades. We're just now having a training for energy auditors. We just finished an amazing project for Indigenous women to design, build, and own their own home. And that is going to scale up across the country, really. And then we're looking just now at how we can make sure that we're delivering kindergarten to grade 12 schooling.
Yes, hi. Your dental office, right?
We've got you a little paused again, Arlene.
Post-secondary and secondary training. Okay.
Yeah, we've got another little blip here. Just waiting for you to come back.
Okay.
Oh. Not hearing you yet, Arlene. I see you though. We'll get there.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I do hear you now.
Perfect. Okay.
Yay.
So we'll just move over to the next slide. These are just like different departments at Keepers of the Circle, but someone asked a question and I didn't quite catch the question.
I think it was an accidental
Okay.
unmuting there. Yeah.
And this is our Child Care and Family Services department, daycares, circles programs, all kinds of stuff like that. And then we'll just go on to the next slide.
But now you've got me thinking, if that was somebody asking a question, please feel free to type it in the chat or Yeah, we will circle back to some questions in a bit.
Child and families, oh, and then health and wellness. So
Right.
we actually have an Indigenous health team embedded in Keepers of the Circle. So you know, communities look at the whole person, the wellness of the whole community, really. So these things are really to meet the needs of children and families across the continuum. And you'll see, like, we have the CAPC, the CPNP program still. We've boosted that up with infant health, and we've boosted that up with work with Sick Kids Hospital in Toronto in doing the Nurturing the Seed, which is really a infant mental health program. So again, like, really, CAPC and CPNP can consider the wealth of this organization's kind of resources as the partners we developed over those years. This is the result of these partnerships that we were able to form as a result of that early funding. And so our elders were guided the work at Sick Kids Hospital around the development of Nurturing the Seed. And again, an interesting story, a little bit about how, you know, when the discussion started about infant mental health and who would participate in guiding that work, et cetera, you know, right away I emailed PHAC and Blanca at PHAC and Cheeto, who was there at the time. If anybody remembers him, he was wonderful. I emailed them and said we were interested, but to actually participate, you had to participate in this mixed table of non-Indigenous service providers and Indigenous service providers. And I said, if we are sitting at a table with non-Indigenous service providers that's mixed, we're not going to participate, because Indigenous communities first have to really clarify where we kind of sit with infant mental health and those approaches prior to engaging in a conversation with non-Indigenous service providers. And so everything kind of stopped. And then later on, Cheeto called me and said, you know, you're the only one that showed an interest. So, you know, would you please participate? And I said, only if you establish an Indigenous table. And they did. And it became really clear later on, because Dr. Chyle Kulkarni, who really was spearheading this effort at Sick Kids Hospital, worked with different Indigenous communities after that, then to talk about nurturing the seed. And she brought some of the Indigenous people from one community to meet the elders at Keepers of the Circle, because they had guided the work. And she said that when the two met, the discussion was entirely different than when this Indigenous community was participating in this blended table of non-Indigenous service providers. And so when they came to Kirkland Lake and met with elders, this other group, this other community, Dr. Kulkarni said, you know, how come, you know, you talk totally differently and you raise different issues, and you really had a big conversation about how challenging it was to access health services and that sort of thing. And they said, well, it was because we trusted the people we were talking to, and, you know, we kind of, it was like family. You know each other. And it's not like strangers and people you have to be careful of, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, it made a massive difference. And I really credit Dr. Kulkarni and Cheeto and Blanca actually for hearing and listening to the fact that, you know, it has to be an Indigenous conversation first, because you're really battling colonization and you're battling a preset idea of things. And then that became clearer still, you know, when from the outset, we said, you know, it's not all about workers versus families. Workers are families. There really is no distinction. It's really a false divide between who knows what, and, you know, who has the knowledge and who carries the knowledge. And we said, you know, at the end of the day, these early childhood development plans, you know, under Nurturing the Seed, would be developed differently if elders were developing them versus if a worker was. And, you know, a year later, of course, NAN, which is in Ontario, Northern Ontario, instituted a project where they're doing nurturing the seed with natural helpers and elders because they matter. They, you know, so anyway.
We got you frozen again, Arlene. We need to sync up.
All of that to say, this CPNP and oh, can you hear me now?
I think we're getting there. Oh, you're still a little frozen.
I hope so.
I think we're getting there. I think we're connecting again. I think you're there. No worries. It's little glitches. We can make it through. What so I think we're connected again. And you were talking about the false divide between workers and families and the importance of natural helpers.
Right. And again, that goes back to lived experience.
Yeah.
Like really we're again on the same journey, just at different places. And people have different knowledges and different expertises, and you value all of it. You know, I go back to Elder Mario Batiste said, you know, as children learn from us, we learn from children. So it is really that knowledge from everybody that matters. Anyway, as you can see from the health and wellness, you know, this in particular is where CAPC and CPNP fed into. Although, again, in communities, people consider the whole person, the whole family, the whole community. So again, the little bit of seed funding instituted by CAPC and CPNP created this entire trajectory of support for communities and support for Indigenous women and families. So let's go to the next slide. Now, this is the other organization, which is the Yellowknife Women's Society. That was Keepers of the Circle, Northern Ontario. This is the Yellowknife Women's Society. Oh my gosh. Well, this is where I started. So it was in a 2-bedroom rented house. It was a shoddy little house that we rented to begin with. And then we embarrassed the government of the Northwest Territories into leasing us a 5-bedroom former deputy minister's house for $1 to run our organization. And then at some point, you know, again, most of the women I knew couldn't survive living in shelters run by non-Indigenous people. And so they would end up sleeping on our couch in this 5-bedroom house, or we would give them room on the floor, or we would just make sure they didn't freeze, you know, in the north. And eventually we embarrassed the government into giving us a large facility, and we had to rent that place for $4,000 a month. And we had to get funding to do that, et cetera, et cetera. But now they've given that facility to the Yellowknife Women's Society. And now on top of that, they have 2 other houses that are being mortgaged, and they have a 5-bedroom house. And now they also are running a 45-unit hotel as transition housing. So again, the CPNP funding started in this 2-bedroom house. And the trajectory of this organization, we are a major delivery of services, of critical frontline services to the community. So both of these organizations are incredibly valued by the communities they're in, respected, valued, and supported. That would not have happened without that CPNP funding. We'll go to the next slide. That's the end of it. So all of that to say, Keepers of the Circle and the Yellowknife Women's Society run on annual budgets of over $5 million per year. Per year from that little $50,000 investment. And
Wow.
so I've talked to Blanca about that quite a bit and really wished in some ways that PHAC would like step back and really do a video or like some kind of thing that would say, this is what these investments can do over years. And it's really, really important right now because the federal government is making massive investments. Thank goodness. It took a long time to get there, but they are making massive investments. And no one really is doing a good job of documenting the unintended outcomes, because they're very narrowly focused on what their objectives are, their goal is. So that's what they're capturing. They're not capturing, the massive amount of societal change that they created going forward. Anyway, that's what I would say. I'm just going to go back a little bit to that one experience because it taught me a lot. Well, I've had a lot of teachings along the way. But I remember that one experience where, we ran the prenatal program in that little house, and 90% of what we did was advocacy. We went with people to the police, income support or welfare, child welfare. Like our bulk of work was trying to protect women from the system, from the government, from organizations. And so that was 90% of our work. And because we did that, they trusted us. But it was a bit of a crazy place. And when we hired professional people to deliver the prenatal program, they were social workers, they were nurses, they were breastfeeding consultants, blah, blah, blah. But they all wanted it to be pretty sterile, pretty nice. It was just weird. Well, coming from the street, it was just weird. Anyway, they were constantly saying, these women who are accessing this prenatal program deserve better. They deserve to be in a very quiet.
Oh, we've got a blip, Arlene. Maybe I'll stop sharing. That might help. We'll see.
Place and their privacy and on and on. Okay.
Okay. Not quite yet.
Let me know when I'm back.
I think you're back. Back.
Way to go. Well, what I was saying, this taught me a lot. So what happened was the staff finally persuaded me to rent another house where the programs could be delivered, not all the chaos from advocacy and fighting. And, we used to get 50 people a day with problems with welfare and blah, blah, blah. And it was just crazy. And it's a place I felt comfortable and everybody else felt comfortable. But the staff said, no, like the staff in the prenatal program said, we have to go over to this other place because it's so quiet and so nice and people will love it and blah, blah, blah. So we rented this other house, and I just laugh now because it was pink and it had French doors, and the staff loved it. But the women wouldn't go there, even though it was just a block away. So we would say to the women, make sure you go over to that program because it'll be really good for you and you get food and blah, blah, blah. But they just would not go because it was weird and different, and they felt comfortable where somebody cared about them. They just cared. It's not that the other staff didn't, but they couldn't even understand the kind of the experience of women. Anyway, so CPNP, the federal government paid $40,000 for a researcher to really find out why nobody was going to that new site. Right. And I had to laugh because they would pay for the researcher, but they wouldn't pay for like a program person.
Right.
And so in the middle of that, in the middle of that research where they were asking people why they wouldn't go to that new place, we moved into another building, that big building I was talking about. And so the programs came back in where the advocacy was, and then everybody would go to the program.
Mhm.
And, you know, at some point I did question myself, you know, because I didn't go to university.
Mhm.
I finished high school, but I had no credentials at all, except being on the street. And I did question myself, and I prayed, and I just thought maybe I'm the wrong person, maybe they're right, blah, blah, blah. And as I prayed, it just became very clear, you know, the thoughts I had was, you have a job to do. Do your job, quit whining, be responsible. And it is not those professionals' job to respond to the community, it's yours, because you live there and you've been given that job. So I sucked it up, stopped crying, and I went back to the federal government and I said, we know what we are doing. I am not prepared to have that staff walk off with that program thinking that they know
Right.
what it's like in communities. And so once the program and the advocacy came back together in that large building, the programs thrived.
Mm.
And then I'll just tell this one other story. Am I running out of time almost?
Mm.
I'll just tell this one other story that was a learning lesson, you know. And that was, you know, we had this one woman. Of course, I still love all those women. I still go to the center, even though I'm in theory retired. Through Facebook, I hear from women all across the north who want me to go with income support with them, etc. And I do. And but in this one instance, it was a woman who had a baby. She was in the prenatal program, and she had a baby, and she was, you know, it would be past her time because they could only be in the program for a year at the time. And so she wouldn't be able to come to the program after that, you know, because her time was up. And so she told the staff she was pregnant again. And the staff spent enormous amounts of energy trying to prove that she wasn't pregnant and she just wanted to stay in the program for the food or whatever. And it was just like such a matter of conversation. It was horrible. And so eventually that woman got mad at them and told them to fuck off. And she threw a can of tuna at one of the staff. And so I said to the staff, I said, hey, I said, you know, I can defend a person staying in the program because they want to. I can defend that. I can't defend, you know, your decision to harass her because you think the program is up or whatever. So, you know, at the end of the day, I remember, I won't go into that part, but I had a little conversation with the federal minister at the time, you know, about valuing people. So, you know, I have other slides, you know, about the difference, but, you know, it is not, I shouldn't say it's not easy. I'll just give an example of an elders conversation lately. We're looking at, you know, ways of decolonizing, et cetera, et cetera. And we were meeting with elders, and they've developed a wonderful document called Journey Together about their perspective on what is culturally safe. And we were asking them about, you know, job descriptions and, you know, what would you put in this job description for these people, blah, blah, blah. And so the elders at some point said, if you hire the right people, they know what to do. They don't need a job description. You have to hire the right person because they know what to do. And that's just the truth of it. So again, I didn't go to university till I was 65. And I got my degree, my master's in leadership. So what it did is it just confirmed things I had learned over the years.
Right.
But so I value credentials. It's not that I value them. Is not helpful. And
We've got you a little frozen again, Arlene.
it's not where the work needs to be. Okay.
Yeah, we're just syncing up again. Not quite yet.
Anyway, let me know when I'm there.
Okay, I think we're
Am I
here.
there yet?
I think we're
Oh.
reconnected now.
Anyway, I'll just leave it on this note, and the note is the 7 sacred teachings.
Mm,
You know, love, honesty, courage, humility. I can't off the top of my head say what the others are, even though I should be able to at my age. I kind of don't. And that's what we operate from,
right.
hopefully. But, you know, so now we're developing performance evaluation tools that are focused on the 7 grandfather teachings, or the 7 sacred teachings, not on tasks and did you meet these tasks.
Right.
Anyway, I don't know how to convey that, but as a person with lived experience of homelessness, you can't replace that. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. And just if you have any questions, I'm up for the questions. Anyway, you guys do amazing work. Let me say that. I know that. Amazing work. Anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Oh, Arlene, I thought I'd come up back and join you as you're opening up to questions and comments. And I will just, first of all, just say, wow, you really, I feel I've been taken on an amazing journey, and just the, for you to take us through that history and to, you know, just highlight how important it is that we remember that, and that it, you know, we need to draw on the history and remember that there was some willingness to do groundbreaking work in the past that, you know, perhaps we can need to bring that back into as we're going forward. So if anybody does have questions or comments, I'm, you know, seeing some gratitude in the chat, and certainly feel free to share that there, or questions, or come on video with us, or unmute yourself. And if you have any questions or comments for Arlene.
I did actually, Arlene. Thank you so much. I loved hearing about your lived experience and challenging sort of those hierarchical structural norms that are part of colonization, and pushing back against those. So thank you so much. It's nice to hear someone else speak about that from such a passionate viewpoint. I also was really interested if you'd be willing to share the tool that you're developing based on the 7 grandfathers teachings. I would love to have a copy of that if you are willing to make that available once you complete it.
Well, we're just in the starting point of that. So actually, if anybody's interested, I think it would be great to develop it together. Again, you know, the telling mark for me is, what do you call that? It's a decolonization in every organization is very difficult. And there's an assumption that because an organization is Indigenous, that, you know, they've got it all wrapped up and, you know, it's all tickety-boo, but it really isn't. And I always go back to the issue of children. You know, how you can tell we're sort of stuck in colonial ways is back in the 70s and 80s. If you went to a meeting, babies were always present. Moms traveled with their babies, you know, to conferences and whatever, and they were always around and at every meeting and that sort of thing. But they've been removed really from meetings and from workplaces and that sort of thing. And so at Keepers of the Circle, we run kind of a fairly fluid kind of place, you know, and we try to really keep it community. But they still have that issue of children. So when staff, you know, when children come by, rather than kind of support children to be in the workplace, they want to have doors and walls. They want to make sure kids don't touch their computers and all that kind of stuff, depending on the children. If it's children of certain staff, they can stay. And if it's children of other staff, no, they can't stay. So we're really talking about really how you, again, allow children to be in places. Like I remember this little kid came up from the daycare once to quote the other end of the building. And she looked around and she said, because there's a big kitchen, there's always stew on. So we created community there, but the kids are at the daycare at the other end of the building. And this little girl came up and she goes, whose home is this? And one of the staff looked and she said, it's your home. This is everybody's home. And she went, oh, but really, how would she know that? Because she's at the other end of the building in daycare. And of course, the elders have talked a lot about, I had to laugh because we're setting up, quote, forest schools, which actually elders have been doing forever. And so the daycare worker was developing a form. The best colonial sign is a form. She's developing a waiver for parents to sign for their kids to go on the land. And the waiver was astounding. It was probably 3 pages long, and it listed all of the dangers of the land and basically said to parents to sign off saying that if something happened when their kids were on the land, Keepers of the Circle is not responsible. And so I kind of laughed and said, oh no, we're not going to be giving that to parents. And elders really turned that around and said, actually, the danger is in the 4 walls. That is where the danger is. It's not on the land. It's not with, elders and people in the community. It's the 4 walls and the structure you're building around how learning happens. Anyway, this is interesting. So again, the work around decolonization is happening across the country. It's just happening. It's not easy. There's people far more
We got you frozen again, Arlene, but we'll wait for
expert than me, and I'm turning the, but I'll work till I am not here. Oh, okay.
Not quite yet.
Thanks.
Oh, I think we are.
Coming around.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. I'm getting into the rhythm of it.
So what I was saying is anyone can take on this work and everyone should and are. So it's not, I'm not leading that work and I shouldn't be, but I think that there is a role again for CAPC and CPNP to be cutting edge, to say what is the structure for this, service delivery. So at least in the preliminary, prior to my retirement, we were talking about, asking staff to demonstrate, to give examples or demonstrate how they exhibited love or how they exhibited honesty and courage. And, quite often people assume they're individual teachings. Like they'll say, can you get an elder to give us a teaching on honesty, blah, blah, blah. But actually the 7 sacred teachings they're a balance. You cannot tell the truth if you're not telling it in love. You cannot, love someone without being courageous enough to tell them the truth. So it actually is the interdependence and the balance of all of those things. So really the tool for evaluation or performance improvement really would be on how you can accurately describe how you're using those teachings in relationships. Because if you have solid relationships, you will have solid work, you will have solid interventions for your peers, your colleagues, your families, your communities. So the work hasn't been done yet. It's just been discussed. That's what I would say. So I encourage all of you just to take on that little task or that little bit of work. And, again, CAPC, CPNP could be a place where that happens. And CAPC was the first, CPNP and CAPC were the first that valued the voices of lived experience, the first that valued hiring women from the program, not outside professionals to be running programs, that kind of stuff. Anyway, be cutting edge again. So when
Mhm.
CAPC and CPNP are looking at their renewal, and I read their evaluation, and I read kind of the direction they're going in, and some of it was good, and some of it they're right on. They admitted actually that the big failure in the program was not scaling up the funding to meet the demand, or the funding to meet the the cost of living, or to meet a living wage even. So like, that's a solid finding that they could change. I just think they saw it as a, what do you call that? Like a little task, and they seeded it, or give a little bit of money toward this effort. They didn't realize that they were actually contributing to reconciliation in 1990. They didn't actually realize that they were creating that paradigm shift, because a lot of those children, I see them today. I actually laugh because one of the women said, "Oh, you've got my baby on there, but now she's like 20. I said, "I know, but it's so cute. I have to use that picture." But these women that were in the prenatal program are leaders. They're astounding leaders, brilliant advocates of community, and man, they're wonderful. So even if you could reach back to really look at, a collage of who these babies were and are, that would be quite an amazing little picture. I don't think anyone has looked at that. Who are these babies that were supported?
Yeah, really, I'm really hearing your message very strongly in terms of, you talked about the importance of documenting that journey and the impacts, and most importantly, or at least remembering those unintended consequences and those seeds of societal change, which is huge and monumental. So I am very appreciative that you are speaking so passionately about this. And so does anybody else have a question or comment for Arlene as we move into wrapping up?
The one tool you might be interested in that I could share is, we did develop, I had to laugh at kind of what happened there, but we did develop the Timiskaming district developed a Indigenous framework for working with non-Indigenous organizations, a cultural competency tool for working with non-Indigenous organizations. So you might find that interesting. And again, Journey Together was a document that we prepared for creating culturally safe spaces, and it really spoke about how elders perceive culturally safe spaces, which kind of means no rules. So the elders and I get along really well. It's all about no rules. And organizations can't help themselves but get into rules. And yeah,
for sure. Okay. Checking in one more time to see if anybody else has questions or comments, and we'll move into, we've got 3 $20 coffee cards to give away. And then we will be, and I see Sheila has joined us on screen again, and she's prepared to close us off with a closing prayer. And so Arlene, thank you again for being with us. Your wisdom and experience is much appreciated. I think you might be frozen at the moment, but that's okay. I think you can still hear me. What I thought we could do is maybe, if Arlene, if you'd be willing to choose a number between 1 and 100 and write it down, then we will have people put in a guess, and maybe we'll have the 3 closest people to your number take away a coffee card today. So let me know if when you've got a number in mind, Arlene. A number between 1 and 100. Oh, no, we'll start again. This time, just keep it to yourself for a bit, Arlene, and then we'll have everybody guess.
Oh, okay.
So get it. Do you have another number in your head? Okay. All right. So now, if everybody who wants to possibly win a $20 coffee card, put a number in the chat. And we'll give a minute for everybody to do that. Oh, my mouse isn't working here. Okay. We've got quite a few folks here have added in numbers. Okay, going once, going twice, 3 times. Okay, now Arlene, what was your number?
Mhm.
Okay, so Arlene for sure got a coffee card. Let me get my. And what was that number, Lurleen? 55.
55.
Okay, so who'd be the 2 other closest people? This is making, I see, is 58. And was there a high 40s one? 44.
Was.
So is it then Florence and Colleen? Are those our other winners? Woohoo! Lurleen
Yay, miigwech.
and Colleen. Congratulations, Lurleen. Colleen, and
Oh,
Florence.
thank you.
So I'll be following up with you, and you get your choice of Tim Hortons or Starbucks, and we'll get that out to you shortly after the conference. And wow, what a beautiful day this has been. I'm really just thrilled that you all joined us, and grateful to Sheila and Arlene. And we are going to hand ourselves back to Sheila for some closing thoughts and closing blessing.
Bojani Kinawea. Sorry I missed your talk there, Arlene. We were really wanting to hear you, but I'm grateful that it's been recorded so that we'll get to partake anyways. So I just want to say in closing, Chimigwech Kajemnado, Chimigwech for this beautiful day, and for bringing everyone together, for learning and for sharing, and for all the guidance and direction that we've all received. We give thanks to all the elements and the 4 directions, all those grandmothers and grandfathers, and to all of our ancestors, and to Gajemnado for providing, Mother Earth for providing water and food. And maybe we come together and lift all those that we service and help in our lives. Lift them up and put them in Creator's hands, and just and I ask blessings for everyone on Zoom land, and lift you all up and place you and your families all in Creator's hands. And we just give thanks for this time that we've shared. And as we move forward, travel safe. If you're traveling, I wish for safe travels for everyone. And we'll meet back here again tomorrow as well. And Chimigwech for having this, Sydney, again. Chimigwech to you, and to Arlene, all the facilitators, and all those that shared. Miigwech. Miigwech, 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 Nishik.
Miigwech, Sheila. Thank you so much. You brought so much to today. I'm grateful for your presence, and grateful for everybody who's able to join. And I did put in the chat a link to a short survey if you have time to fill that out, and also a link to our comment board. You're welcome to share any thoughts there. And hopefully you're able to join us tomorrow starting at 9 in the morning. And we've got a great day tomorrow, and Sheila will be joining us then again, not only to open us up, but to offer some teachings, which I'm really excited about. And we have other really great presenters as well. So Take care, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of the day, and I look forward to seeing you again, hopefully tomorrow, and if not, then soon. Right? Take care.
Come on,
Bye-bye.
Pico up, man.
Bye-bye.